This article relates to the AQA Power and the People section on the slavery and the anti-slave organisations, anti-slavery movement. It's very interesting from a historian's perspective because it was the first sense of a public movement against a particular policy. And the public were galvanized to take a moral stand against slavery during the 1780s and 1790s through a number of methods: petitions, through public speaking, through pamphlets, through the boycotting of sugar that was made in plantations where slavery was taking place, through the creation of memorabilia, famously Wedgwood's medallion, "Am I thy brother's keeper?", which has a slave on the medallion. And Thomas Clarkson, amongst others, went around the country creating a public mood against slavery. And William Wilberforce in Parliament was the champion of the anti-slavery or anti-slave trade bills. Well, the anti-slave trade bills failed, partly because there was a lot of economic reasons at the time that suggested that this could harm the country financially and it would be a loss of revenues and taxes. Ultimately, it did succeed in 1807 during a brief respite in the Napoleonic Wars, because that's another reason why the anti-slave trade bills were struggling, because at the time Britain was fighting an existential war against France and against the French Revolution and the concept of this very radical vision of democracy that was being proposed by the revolutionaries. And this war lasted really until 1815 with this brief respite. And during that respite, there was an opportunity for the anti-slave trade bill to be passed in 1807. And then finally in 1833, slavery was abolished throughout the British Empire, the culmination, you might say, of all this moral agitation. And the British government effectively bought all the slaves off the plantation owners. And you can see this as being an incredible moral crusade, and the first time really in history that morality played a central part in the way decisions were made. In some ways you might say morality played a central part where it was actually against our interests at the time of a very serious war. And it was the Christian underpinnings that I think could be said to have created this climate. The 18th century had been a time of spiritual decline up until the Wesleys and Whitfield had created a spiritual revival, and that revival, many have argued, prevented us from having a revolution like France, and had finally percolated into the upper echelons of the society by the end of this century, the 18th century. And so that by the beginning of the 19th century, it was quite a significant number of Christians involved in politics and other areas, often called the Clapham sect. One other interesting observation. One of the arguments against slavery being abolished and slave trade being abolished was of the financial ruin. And some have argued that Britain created its wealth from the slave trade. Well, whilst no doubt wealth had been created in the context of the slave trade, it's interesting to note that with the abolition of the slave trade and the abolition of slavery, Liverpool didn't go into terminal decline. It went from strength to strength and became the second port of the empire and one of the largest ports in the world. Likewise, Britain didn't go into poverty as a result of the abolition of slavery. Far from it, it actually prospered. And this reminds us of an incident in the Bible when, during the time of Jeremiah, Jerusalem was surrounded, scheduled for destruction because of its sins, and the people of Jerusalem decided on their own initiative to abolish slavery. And when they did that, Jeremiah came with a word from the Lord to say, you will be blessed for that decision, and I will, to some extent, relent on my planned destruction of Jerusalem. And this was on the basis of the abolition of slavery. Sadly, the people of Jerusalem rescinded that abolition of slavery and took back the slaves. And you might say the rest is history. Jerusalem was destroyed. But it's interesting that in the heart of God, the action of abolishing slavery was considered such an honourable act that it caused him to partially relent his judgment on Jerusalem. I wonder if the success of Britain during the 19th century is actually in part a product of God's approval of the role that Britain took in abolishing slavery and making sure that other nations abolished slavery as well. A lot of the Royal Navy did that work. Well, thank you for listening.